Elias Carter gripped his rifle tightly as he moved through the dense alien forest. The towering trees stretched toward the sky, their glowing blue leaves casting an eerie light over the undergrowth. The air smelled different here, not like Earth. It was thick with the scent of damp moss and something metallic, something unnatural. He had been on this planet for 3 weeks, scouting the land for the new human colony. It was a beautiful but dangerous place. Strange creatures lurked in the shadows, their eyes reflecting the dim light. Some were harmless, running away at the first sight of humans. Others were not. Elias and his team had already lost 2 men to something lurking in the forest. They never found the bodies. Only deep claw marks in the soil and broken branches, as if something enormous had passed through. Tonight, he would find it. "Stay close," he whispered to his partner, Jonas Reyes, who was a few steps behind him. Jonas nodded, gripping his own weapon. The rest of the scouting team was positioned nearby, waiting for any sign of movement. A sound echoed through the forest, a low guttural growl. Elias froze. There, in the distance, something shifted between the trees. A dark silhouette, taller than any human, moving with unnatural grace. The creature had been following them for days, always watching, always waiting. Elias raised his rifle. His breath was steady. He had fought in wars before. He had hunted dangerous creatures on uncharted worlds. Whatever this thing was, it wouldn't take another man from his team. The creature stepped into the dim moonlight. It was massive, over 8 feet tall, covered in dark, sleek fur. Its limbs were long and powerful, its glowing silver eyes locked onto Elias. The beast did not charge. It did not roar. It simply stood there, watching. Elias didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger. The gunshot shattered the silence. The bullet struck the creature in the chest, and it staggered backward, collapsing onto the mossy ground. The forest went still. Elias lowered his rifle, exhaling. It was over. Then, the impossible happened. A soft voice, barely more than a whisper, cut through the darkness. "Why did you hurt me?" Elias froze. His blood ran cold. Jonas took a step forward, his face pale. Did it just speak? Elias swallowed hard. It wasn't possible. He had faced wild beasts before, mindless predators that attacked without thought. But this voice, it wasn't the sound of an animal. It was the voice of something alive, something intelligent. He approached the fallen creature carefully, his rifle still raised. The being lay on the ground, its breathing shallow. Up close, Elias could see details he hadn't noticed before. The creature wasn't just covered in fur. Its skin shimmered, almost like armor. Its hands were not claws, but something more refined, more delicate. Its silver eyes weren't filled with rage or malice. They were filled with pain. And now he saw something even more shocking. Beneath the dark fur, just below its wounded shoulder, was something unmistakable. A symbol, a mark carved into its skin, a mark that matched the one on Elias's own uniform. His breath caught in his throat. This was not just a wild animal. This was someone connected to the past. And he had just shot her. The being struggled to lift her head, her eyes locking onto his. "Please," she whispered. Her voice was weak, fragile. Elias stepped back, his mind racing. This mission was supposed to be about securing land for the colony, about keeping his people safe from the dangers of this world. But now, a new question haunted him. Had he been the danger all along? Elias Carter's hands trembled slightly as he stared at the wounded being before him. The silver-eyed creature, no, she, lay motionless on the ground, her breathing ragged. The glowing blue leaves above cast eerie patterns across her dark fur. Jonas Reyes stepped beside him, gripping his rifle tightly. "What do we do, Elias?" he whispered. His voice was uncertain. Elias didn't answer. His mind raced. The mission was clear: scout the land, neutralize threats, and secure the area for the human colony. They had believed this creature was one of those threats. But threats didn't speak. Threats didn't bleed like this. The mark on her skin, so similar to the insignia on Elias's uniform, sent a chill through his body. It was impossible. Humanity had never been here before. No records of other intelligent life existed in this system. And yet, this being had a symbol that should not exist. Why did you hurt me? Her voice still echoed in his mind. It hadn't been full of rage, not even hatred, just confusion. He took a step closer, lowering his rifle. Jonas tensed. Elias, what the hell are you doing? Jonas hissed. Elias ignored him. Slowly, carefully, he crouched beside the creature. She flinched slightly, her silver eyes dull with pain. I'm sorry, Elias muttered, almost too softly to hear. He didn't know why he said it. Maybe because, for the first time in his life, he felt sorry after pulling the trigger. The wound on her shoulder bled dark, thick liquid, almost black in the dim light. It seeped through her fur, staining the moss beneath her. Elias had seen death before. He had seen creatures die. But he didn't want to watch her die. His hand hovered over his belt. He carried a small emergency med kit, standard issue for all scouts. It wouldn't do much, but it might slow the bleeding. He reached for it. Jonas grabbed his arm. Elias, stop. His voice was sharp now, urgent. She could be dangerous. Elias met his gaze. She's dying, Jonas. Good. Jonas's jaw clenched. She could have killed us. You saw the size of her. She didn't attack us. She was watching us. That's worse. Jonas's grip tightened. You shot her, Elias. If she was one of us, if she was on our side, she would have said something before now. But she didn't. You know why? Because she isn't like us. Elias looked back at the wounded being. Her breath was getting shallower. If he did nothing, she wouldn't last much longer. Step back, Elias, Jonas warned. But Elias didn't move. His entire life, he had been trained to follow orders, follow mission protocols, survive. But something deep inside him, something instinctive, told him this was different. Finally, he made his choice. He ripped free from Jonas's grasp, pulled out the med kit, and pressed a clotting agent against the wound. The creature winced, her muscles tensing, but she didn't resist. Jonas swore under his breath, "You're making a mistake." Elias didn't care. The bleeding slowed as the wound sealed slightly. It wasn't perfect, but it would buy her time. Her silver eyes fluttered open again, unfocused. She looked at Elias, her expression unreadable. "You help," she whispered. Elias nodded. She swallowed hard, as if struggling to stay awake. "Not enemy." "No," Elias said firmly. "Not an enemy." For a moment, she simply stared at him, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Then, slowly, her body relaxed. Jonas let out a frustrated sigh. "You do realize Command is going to have our heads for this, right?" "Let them," Elias muttered. Jonas shook his head, stepping back. "Fine. But if she turns on us, I won't hesitate." Elias didn't answer. His focus was on her now. The being he had shot. The being who should have been a monster. But now, he wasn't sure who the real monster was. Elias Carter sat beside the wounded creature, his heart still racing. The forest around them was eerily silent, as if the trees themselves were watching. The thick, blue leaves above swayed gently in the wind, casting strange, shifting shadows over the mossy ground. Jonas Reyes stood a few feet away, his rifle still in his hands, his face tense. "Elias, we need to get back to camp. We can't just sit here all night." Elias knew he was right. Their team was waiting for them at the outpost. The colony leaders expected reports. And yet, he couldn't leave her here, bleeding, helpless, alone. The being's silver eyes flickered open again. She winced, trying to shift her body, but pain stopped her. A low, pained sound escaped her throat. "Easy," Elias said, keeping his voice calm. "You're hurt." She stared at him for a long moment. Then she did something that made his stomach tighten. She reached for him. Her fingers, long, delicate, covered in a thin layer of dark fur, barely brushed his wrist before she hesitated, pulling back. It was a simple movement, but it wasn't animalistic. It wasn't a beast's reaction. It was something deeply human. "Who are you?" Elias asked softly. She blinked, struggling to form words. "Naera," she finally whispered. Her voice was weak, but the name was clear. Elias exchanged a glance with Jonas, who frowned but said nothing. "My name is Elias," he said, then nodded toward Jonas. "That's Jonas." Naera exhaled slowly. "Not enemy." Elias shook his head. "No, not anymore." Jonas groaned, rubbing his forehead. "Elias, we don't even know what she is. We don't know where she's from, what she wants." Naera's gaze shifted to Jonas. "Survive," she murmured. Jonas paused. "What?" She swallowed hard, as if each word cost her energy. "I'd only wanted to survive." Elias felt a sharp pang of guilt, and I almost took that away from her. He glanced at the strange mark on her shoulder again, the one that resembled the insignia on his uniform. It couldn't be a coincidence. "Naera," he said carefully, "have you seen humans before?" Her expression darkened. She hesitated, her silver eyes flickering with something painful. Then she gave the smallest nod. Elias's pulse quickened. "Where?" he asked. She swallowed, her breathing shaky. "Long ago, before fire." Elias's brow furrowed. "Before fire?" Jonas muttered, "That makes no sense. We just got to this planet. No human has ever been here before us." Naera's gaze locked onto Elias again. She struggled to move, but she slowly lifted a trembling hand and pointed toward the distant mountains, barely visible beyond the dense trees. "There," she whispered. "The ruins. They wait." A chill ran down Elias's spine. Ruins? Humanity had sent probes to this planet before the colony ships arrived. There were no signs of intelligent life, no cities, no advanced technology. And yet, Naera was telling them something existed in those mountains. Something old. Something connected to humans. Jonas looked at Elias. "You're not seriously thinking about checking it out, are you?" Elias didn't answer. His mind was racing. If there were ruins, if there was proof of human presence long before they arrived, it changed everything. Naera's breathing grew weaker. She had pushed herself too hard just to speak. Elias knew he had another choice to make. He turned to Jonas. "Help me carry her." Jonas's eyes widened. "Are you out of your damn mind? She's not coming with us. If we leave her here, she'll die." Jonas scoffed. "She's not our responsibility." Elias stared at him. "She is now." For a long moment, Jonas said nothing. Then he groaned and threw up his hands. "Fine, but if she turns on us, I'm putting her down myself." Elias ignored him and carefully lifted Naera into his arms. She was surprisingly light, her body lean but strong. She tensed slightly, but didn't resist. As they began their slow journey back to camp, Elias knew one thing for certain. This mission was no longer just about scouting a planet. This was about uncovering a truth that had been buried for far too long. The journey back to the outpost was slow. Elias carried Naera carefully, feeling the rise and fall of her shallow breaths. She was weak, but she was still alive. The night was quiet, except for the rustling of leaves and the distant cries of alien creatures. The glowing blue trees cast strange shadows as they moved through the dense forest. Jonas walked beside Elias, his grip tight on his rifle. Every now and then he glanced at Naera with suspicion. "You know the others aren't going to like this," he muttered. Elias already knew that. Their team had strict orders. Anything unknown was a potential threat. If the colony leaders found out he had brought an alien back, they would see it as a mistake. maybe even a betrayal. But Elias couldn't let her die. As they neared the outpost, the steel walls of their camp came into view, standing tall against the wild landscape. The guards at the gate spotted them and raised their weapons immediately. "Halt!" one of them shouted. "What are you carrying?" Elias tightened his hold on Naara. "She's wounded. She needs medical attention." The guard's eyes narrowed. "What is she?" "A survivor," Elias said firmly. Jonas sighed. "We don't know, but she's not hostile." Another guard, Sergeant Hale, stepped forward. "She was a strict soldier, always following the rules." "Carter, this wasn't part of the mission," she said, crossing her arms. "Bringing back an unknown creature. What were you thinking?" Elias met her gaze. "She spoke to me, Sergeant, in our language." That made Hale hesitate. Behind her, the other soldiers exchanged confused glances. "That's impossible," she said. Jonas scoffed. "Yeah. Well, I heard it too. She's not just some mindless beast." Hale considered this for a moment, then sighed. "Take her to the medical tent. But the moment she becomes a threat, I want her gone." Elias nodded. "Understood." They carried Naara inside, laying her down on one of the medical beds. The colony's doctor, Dr. Lane, frowned as he examined her wounds. "This is no ordinary creature," he murmured, touching the strange symbol on her shoulder. "This mark, it looks almost human." Elias leaned forward. "What does it mean?" Dr. Lane shook his head. "I don't know, but I want to find out." As Naara rested, Elias sat beside her, watching her steady breathing. Her presence raised more questions than answers. Who was she? How did she know their language? And what were these ruins she had spoken about? A few hours later, Naara stirred. Her silver eyes opened slowly, scanning her surroundings. When she saw Elias, she relaxed slightly. "You? Help," she whispered. Elias nodded. "Yes." Her fingers weakly reached for him again, but this time, she pointed toward the mountains in the distance. "The ruins, they wait." Elias exchanged a glance with Jonas. "We need to go there," Elias said. Jonas groaned. "You're not serious." "If there's something in those ruins that explains who she is, or why she knows about humans, we have to find out." Naara swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not safe, but important." Elias made up his mind. "Then we go." Jonas sighed. "This is going to get us all killed." But Elias had a feeling that the real danger wasn't the ruins. It was the truth waiting inside them. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the alien landscape as Elias Carter tightened the straps of his backpack. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp moss and strange flowers. In the distance, the towering mountains loomed, covered in mist. The ruins were somewhere up there, waiting. Naara sat on a nearby rock, still weak but awake. Her silver eyes studied Elias as he prepared for the journey. Jonas Rice stood beside him, arms crossed, looking frustrated. "This is insane," Jonas muttered. "We don't even know what's up there. What if it's a trap?" Elias glanced at Naara. She had barely spoken since waking up, but he could see the urgency in her eyes. Whatever was in those ruins, it mattered to her, and somehow Elias felt it mattered to them too. "You don't have to come," Elias said. Jonas groaned. "Oh, I have to come. If you get yourself killed, someone needs to drag your body back." Elias smirked. "Good to know you care." Jonas rolled his eyes. Naara slowly stood, her legs shaking slightly. Elias reached out to steady her, but she held up a hand. "I can walk," she whispered. Elias wasn't sure she had the strength, but he didn't argue. Sergeant Hale and Dr. Lane watched from the camp entrance. "You have 24 hours, Hale warned. "If you're not back by then, we assume the worst." Elias nodded. "Understood." With that, the three of them set off toward the mountains. The hike was difficult. The forest grew denser as they moved uphill, the glowing blue trees twisting into strange shapes. Unfamiliar sounds echoed in the distance, chirps, growls, whispers carried by the wind. Jonas kept his rifle ready. "I hate this place," he muttered. Elias ignored him, focusing on Na'ara. She moved carefully, each step slow but determined. After hours of climbing, they reached a clearing. The ground here was different. Flat stone, too smooth to be natural. Cracks ran through it, filled with glowing blue moss. "We're close," Na'ara whispered. Then Elias saw it. At the edge of the clearing, half buried in the mountainside, stood the ruins. Massive stone pillars, worn by time, rose into the sky. Strange carvings covered the walls, faded but still visible, and at the center, an enormous doorway, broken and crumbling, led into the darkness. Jonas exhaled. "Well, this is creepy." Elias stepped forward, running his fingers over one of the carvings. His breath caught in his throat. The symbols weren't alien. They were human letters, barely visible, but there. And one word stood out among them. Project Genesis. Elias's heart pounded. This can't be possible. Na'ara looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You were here, before," she murmured. Jonas frowned. "What the hell does that mean?" Elias shook his head. "I don't know, but we're about to find out." Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the ruins, and the darkness swallowed them whole. Darkness surrounded them as Elias Carter stepped cautiously into the ruins. His flashlight beam flickered over cracked stone walls, revealing faded carvings and metal panels covered in dust. The air smelled ancient, like something lost to time. Behind him, Jonas Reyes muttered, "I really don't like this." Na'ara followed closely, her silver eyes scanning the walls as if searching for something. Her breathing was steady now, stronger than before. It was as if coming here gave her energy. Elias pointed to the letters carved into the stone. Project. The words sent a shiver down his spine. "This isn't just some alien ruin," he said. "This was built by humans." Jonas frowned. "That makes no sense. Humans never came to this planet before us." Na'ara's voice was quiet but firm. "You did, long ago." Elias turned to her. "How do you know that?" Na'ara hesitated, then reached out, pressing her hand against a panel on the wall. A low hum echoed through the chamber. Dust fell from the ceiling as old machinery came to life. Jonas took a step back, gripping his rifle. What did she just do? Lights flickered to life, revealing a massive hall beyond the entrance. More writing covered the walls. Diagrams, research notes, images of planets, and something else. Elias's breath caught. There were pictures of humans, scientists in lab coats, engineers working on machines, and beside them, beings like Na'ara. Not drawings, not guesses, actual images. Jonas swore under his breath. "No way." Elias moved closer, reading the faded text beneath one of the images. Project Genesis, Human Variant Adaptation Experiment. He stared, his mind racing. This was a research facility. Na'ara nodded slowly. "You created us." Jonas looked like he had been punched. "What?" Na'ara turned to them. "Long ago, your people came to this world. You changed us, made us stronger, faster. You wanted us to survive here. But then, you left." Elias shook his head. "That's not possible. We would have known about this. There's no record of any past human colonization." Na'ara's expression darkened. "Because they erased it." A deep silence filled the room. Jonas exhaled sharply. "Okay, let's say, for a second, that this is true. Why would humans abandon a project like this? Why cover it up?" Na'ara looked away. "Because something went wrong." Elias's stomach tightened. What happened? Before Na'ara could answer, a deep rumbling shook the ruins. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The sound of grinding metal echoed from deeper within. Jonas raised his rifle. That didn't sound good. Naera's silver eyes widened. They know we are here. Elias felt a chill. Who? Naera swallowed hard. The ones who never left. From the shadows of the ruins, something moved. And then, the darkness came alive. The rumbling grew louder, shaking the ground beneath Elias Carter's feet. The ancient walls of the ruin groaned, as if something deep inside had awakened. Dust swirled in the flickering lights, and from the darkness, strange figures emerged. At first, Elias thought they were statues. Tall, humanoid shapes covered in metal and stone. But then their eyes flickered to life, glowing a cold, electric blue. Jonas Reyes cursed under his breath, raising his rifle. What the hell are those things? Naera's face was pale, her silver eyes filled with fear. They were once like me, but they were left behind. Elias took a step forward, his heart pounding. Left behind? What do you mean? Before Naera could answer, the figures moved. With unnatural speed, they charged forward, their movements jerky but powerful. Their limbs were covered in layers of old cybernetic implants, wires sparking as they rushed toward the group. Their faces were twisted, not fully human, not fully machine. Survivors of Project Genesis, but corrupted by time. Run, Elias shouted. Jonas didn't need to be told twice. He opened fire, bullets sparking against the creature's metal plating. Some stumbled, but none stopped. Naera grabbed Elias's arm. This way. She pulled him toward a side passage, half collapsed but still open. Jonas followed, firing a few more shots before ducking inside. The creatures shrieked, their voices mechanical and broken, like echoes of something that had once been human. The passage led them deeper into the ruins. The walls were lined with old screens, cracked and flickering. Ancient data logs scrolled across them, displaying faded images of scientists working in the facility. One of the screens showed a final message. Project Genesis. Terminated. All personnel evacuated. Experiment deemed dangerous. Elias swallowed hard. They abandoned them. Naera nodded. They created us, then left when things went wrong. The ones too damaged to survive were left behind. Over time, they became this. Jonas shook his head. And now, they think we're their enemies. A loud crash behind them made them turn. The creatures were forcing their way into the passage. Sparks flew as their metal claws scraped against the walls. Naera looked around desperately. Then she pointed. There. An exit. At the end of the corridor, a rusted door stood slightly open, revealing daylight beyond. Elias didn't hesitate. Move, he shouted. They sprinted toward the exit. The creatures shrieked behind them, their footsteps growing closer. Jonas fired his last rounds before his rifle clicked empty. Go, 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 Jonas yelled. Elias reached the door first and shoved it open. Bright sunlight blinded him for a moment, and then he felt fresh air against his skin. They stumbled outside onto a rocky ledge high in the mountains. Below them, the vast alien forest stretched for miles. The outpost was a small speck in the distance. Naera turned back just as one of the creatures lunged through the door. With a swift motion, she slammed her hand against a control panel on the wall. The ruins trembled. A warning siren echoed through the air. Then, with a loud explosion, the passage collapsed, trapping the creatures inside. Elias panted, staring at the sealed entrance. Silence returned to the mountains. Jonas dropped to the ground, gasping. I can't believe we made it. Naera stood quietly, looking at the ruins with sadness. They were once like me, she whispered. Left behind, forgotten. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. But you weren't forgotten. We found you, and we'll make sure the others know the truth. Naera turned to him, hope flickering in her silver eyes. Then maybe there is still a future. Elias nodded. Yeah, maybe there is. As they began their journey back to the outpost, Elias knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. The truth about Project Genesis had been buried for too long, and now it was time to bring it to light.